Right. Hi there, everyone. So this is the first time I am doing this. My apologies if any technical difficulties arise. I hope I've thought of everything, but if not, I'll improve as we go. So today I'm going to be looking at three different techniques. First up, I'm going to talk a bit about masking techniques. Different types of masks I use, how I use them, benefits and negative side effects of each type. Second up, I am going to be showing how I do rust effects on my terrain. Mainly I use Vallejo Model Air for this. And finally, I'll be looking at washes and Games Workshop contrast paints through the airbrush and how we can use them to alter the colors of the terrain, having laid on our initial color layers and rust effects. So let's get right into it. For my masking techniques, I use liquid mask. This stuff is pretty clever. It comes as a coloured natural resin and it does air dry. This is some I put on earlier today and you can see it's actually dry to the touch, well, mostly. But it does take an hour at least to dry, and while it's still fluid, we can't actually tip it to the side, so it takes a couple of hours to do up a piece like this because I want to cover all the areas on each side of the piece. But what I do when I apply this, and I'll just use a contrast paint as a handy stabilizer for the piece here, is I simply shake the liquid mask bottle, not too much, but just to mix it so we don't have too much of the bluish color on its own. And then I quite simply just apply a layer, and you might worry that you're not going to get this off again and it's going to be a mess, but I promise that this stuff, once it's dry, peels off really nicely. So just doing this piece up, and as you can see, it flows rather nicely, and it's quite easy to see when we actually have full coverage. It does dry semi-transparently, so what you will see eventually is that you're going to be seeing a bit of the underlying color through, but as long as the surface is gloss, it's actually got full coverage with the mask. I'm just going to do the final two panels here. And if we are incredibly lucky, this may have dried before I end my broadcast today. So obviously this is not the piece that I will be painting any more on right now anyways, because this is pretty useless for anything. I would just be messing up things if I tried to paint any more on that. Anyways, what I also use, and what I in general use more than the liquid mask, although this stuff is really clever if you've got the time to wait, but a lot of the time I'm kind of impatient, so I like fast techniques. What I use instead are different types of masking tape, mostly Tamiya. They come in all kinds of widths. This is a 1mm thing. Don't use a lot of that, so it's still in its baggie, but it's clever if you want to do very, very thin stripes. The 6, 10, and I believe this is 18mm, I use quite a lot of. It's really nice for masking in between these little panels. I actually have a second piece. This one I did up a bit earlier, and you can see I actually just used the 18mm. I put in a strip and just cut around it with a hobby knife. Try to not cut too deeply, but it cuts very nicely actually. So this is a really clever way of doing masking of these bits around here. And obviously I can just work my way around the piece. This piece also has some of the liquid mask on it, and you should be able to see we're getting a bit of the original color shining through there, but these are all fully covered. You can see the gloss effects on the windows or on the cutouts here, so that's nice. The last type of masking that I really do a lot of for my San Mortalis terrain is that I use these masking sheets. These are also from Tamiya. They are ridiculously thin, so they go really nicely on there, and I've used these on the top of this piece that I showed you guys before. Here we are. So what I've done here is actually I've taken the masking sheet, I drew up a stencil for it, and I cut out on a laser cutter all these tiny pieces of masking tape from the sheet, and those are made to just fit into the various bits and pieces here. Once I've then got them in, I can cut out the pieces where I want different colors, and I can just apply bits of masking tape on top of what I've then painted like this, to make sure that now I've got all my different layers in there. I've got them all nicely sealed up, so that when I go crazy with the airbrush in a while, I'm not going to be disturbing any of the work that I've already done, which is kind of nice. So as for the piece I actually want to be painting next here, this is a staircase that some of you may have seen on my Instagram. I've been working on a pair of these over the last couple of weeks or so, and I decided to paint one of them up for today's session. I've got some blue panels on here that I've masked away. Once I had those masked, I then went ahead and did some stripe panels just to mix things up, make it fun. This being a staircase, I don't mind it being kind of easy to spot on the table that this is going to be one of those key points to control. So I'm just going to mask these off, and yeah, there we go, just missing the mark slightly there. Fortunately, this is usually kind of easy to get up. There we are. And I'll just reposition this carefully now, and there, that's going to be better. Yeah, good. So last panel down, let's see. As I mentioned, these are really thin, so they're sometimes a bit easy, difficult to grab from the masking backer there. Right, so placing this one carefully, and there we are. Right, so these go in really nicely. What I've done here as well is that I've cut out where there's a valve down here. I've done some cutting on this piece, which has a lot of details. I want these in the same rust brown colors as the rest of my metals on this piece. I could go ahead and do more of that, but for quite a lot of this, I'll just do it after I've done the initial airbrushing work, actually. It's kind of important to make sure to get the edges down most of the way around. A lot of the colors that I'm going to put on top of this are very thin flowing, which is part of the technique, but it does mean that it's going to partially flow underneath the masking tape, no matter what I do, which will add a nice randomness to the effect. Good. So let's get painting. Let's see. So next up, rust effects. For this, I use a number of colors. First, I'm going to go ahead and throw some black surface primer on here. That's mostly to hide where the stripes overlap, where I'm going to want to have rust colors. If I don't do that, I will have a difficulty hiding the very high contrast borders between the yellow and black stripes on the frames around here. That's going to be the first color I throw on. Following that, I will be using a mix of 71039 Hull Red, 71040 Burnt Umber. These are both on the reddish brown spectre, but have a bit of different tints to them. So when I throw those on fairly randomly, they really help bring across the natural rusting of the piece. In addition to those two, I've got 71129 Light Rust and 71130 Orange Rust. These are also from the Model Air range. Really nice orange rusty colors. I use these a lot, both through the airbrush, but also actually with a paintbrush to bring out special detail areas. And finally, while all of these rust colors are still semi-wet, I will be airbrushing 76505 Light Rust Wash on top of it. Now the wash here is not originally devised to go through an airbrush, but it does go through very, very nicely. And what it will do is it will sort of dissolve the lower layers and allow them to flow into each other. Once I've started that process, I will add some of the orange rust to the mix once in a while, just to vary the intensity of the color, because the original light rust here is not very light actually, but the orange rust really helps with that. So those are going to be the colors. Let's get started. My airbrush today is an Ultra. I do have a really nice Infinity one, also from Harder Steinbeck. I'm not going to be wasting that on this stuff today. The Ultra will do just fine. I'm using a fairly wide needle. It's going to be a 0.4, and that's because I really want to get some covering layers on here. I want a lot of paint on here. I don't mind if I lose a tiny bit of detail, if that means it's going to hold up to proper gaming, which this is going to need to once I get as far as that. I've been airbrushing for a bit here, so I do have some residue in the airbrush. Just going to grab some airbrush cleaner, some tissue paper, and actually get the worst of that out of there before I start. The nice thing about having this very wide 0.4 needle is that I am able to, here we go, actually throw a lot of paint through here without that many cleaning operations. If I use a 0.2 or a 0.15, I run the risk of actually having cloggages with the amount of paint I'm pushing through here. So this is a way to just ensure that I have maximum stability, ease of use, and I can paint up a lot of terrain fairly fast. Right, so first off, the black primer. This could be any brand, honestly. A lot of the time I actually use paint cans, spray cans to prime my terrain. At the moment it's been snowing and raining here for about a week or so. So this was primed via airbrush. It's all pretty much the same to me. The compressor that I've got is kind of loud, so if that messes with the sound, I do apologize. I'll try and answer any questions you have as we go. So I'm just covering everything in fairly even layers here. I don't want it on too thick. I'm not really that bothered about the light blue areas, though I could just give them a very fast cover here as well. The main thing is that I get my airbrush primer all around the frames of the yellow and black stripe areas, because otherwise, as I mentioned, those are going to show through, which we don't want. Just getting the primer in there. There we are, primer out, which is fine. wipe this real quick. And whenever I've had primer through the airbrush, just give it a few drops of the cleaner. Clean that out there. There we go, that'll do for now. If I was using a thinner needle, I would need to clean this properly at this point, or I would have issues later with clogging, but the very wide needle actually helps me here. Right, so picking up the 71039 Hull Red, this could be either one of the two. I'm going to be putting them on here fairly randomly, just filling up the cup quite a bit there, and start laying that on there. I'm running quite high pressure today, about 24-26 psi. Again, this is to get a fair amount of paint through the airbrush. I want to not sit here all day working on this, and I want it to look as if it has randomly rusted. So for these starting layers, I'm really just throwing the paint on here. Everything that you see at the moment is going to be covered in 2, 3, 5 further layers anyways. So this is almost purely to start the random process of applying the rust colours. So, switching back to the Hull Red, putting a bit of that on here. This piece that I'm working on is a staircase that I put together because I needed stairs that took up less space than the ones I've done previously, and I needed ones that I could easily reposition as I worked up new table setups. So this is actually a full 2-level staircase. I could presumably make this even taller, but it takes up only a quarter tile, and I've actually cut up a tile so as to make this a fully standalone piece that I can just fit into my setups for some Mortalis games entirely randomly as I choose to use it. Right, so switching back and forth a bit here, a bit more of the burnt umber. The burnt umber is more over into the brown side of the rust spectrum, whereas the Hull Red, kind of implied by the name, it has a more reddish tone to it. And there we are. Good. Okay. Just going to check something here, just a second. So, grabbing some more of the Hull Red. There we are. Boom. Putting that in there. Again, just really throwing the colour on there. Here we are. Almost got the coverage at this point actually that I want. Just about ready to start on the lighter rust colours. Let's see, yeah, let's go. So, switching to the light rust, which again, I'm just fairly randomly. I use a bit less of this, but again, randomly putting it on here. There we are. It's going to really nicely help the feeling of industrial decay, everything going to rust down there in the underhive. Okay, boom. And some of the orange rust. This is a really nice colour, but I use it sparingly because it is, as you will notice, quite bright on here, and this is actually going to be dulled down a bit once I start applying the washes. There we are. Getting some nice colour on there now. And here we go. This is messy work, by the way, so my fingers are going to get some paint on them, but it's all acrylic, so there's no big worry. Okay. So, at this point, I'm just going to pick this up nice and easy. At this point, I've got a very random, not too realistic, but alright rust layer going. I'm just going to throw some of the darker colours on top again. Up. There we are. Throwing in some of the red again to bring the harshest bits down here a bit. There we are. Inner bits there that I didn't really cover enough in the first layer. There we are. Right. I think I'm pretty much ready to start with the rust wash. Just a few seconds. So look here. Yeah. Let's get some of lower layers covered just a tiny bit better. There we are. Right. So at this point, bringing in the light rust wash, and again really just throwing it on there somewhat randomly. This is going to start making all of the other colours sort of flow together. They're going to behave way nicer, going to look way nicer. You can get some cool patterns starting to show up here in a while. And once this is on, I'm actually going to leave this piece. I'm just going to let it dry, and we'll have a look at it a bit later and see how it has turned out. Good. So that's actually the rust layers applied, and already at this point you can see it's looking far nicer, far more realistic than it did originally. I'm just going to spray in some of the orange rust, because that flows along very nicely with the rust wash. I'm going to lay some of that into the stairs, into some of the platforms, just to modulate them a bit more. And finally, I actually did discover that I do have some slight areas that I didn't cover properly on here, so I'm just going to give those a tiny bit. The small panels down here, give them a bit of coverage. There we are. Putting on some more hull red as well, darkening it down here and there. And in order to again bring this together, one final run with the light rust wash. This does get really messy, so eventually I'm going to have to set this aside, which is probably about now. And there we are. Really nice randomized beginning rust effect here. Good. So for my second piece, I've got a quarter tile here that I prepared earlier. This one has the masking on it. It's had the original rust layers, and it's pretty much ready to move on to the next step. This is actually the floor for the staircase. So And for this one, I think I'm just going to start peeling off the masking tapes. I'm going to start layering on some washes and contrasts in order to further change and modulate the colors underneath. But let's see what we have underneath here. This slightly. Right, so if all has gone well, I should be able to just take up these various pieces of masking tape, the tip of my scalpel here, and just slowly uncover what's happened underneath. Yep. I should mention that I could, of course, go ahead and do a second layer of the rust techniques at this point. I don't have to stop here. This one actually turned out slightly more uniform than I generally like. It's not as random in the rust, but I can fix that at a later stage. So, peeling off the masking tape from each tile here, and you'll see that the corners again have got these nice stripes on them. If there's any interest, or if you people are wondering how to get nice even stripes, I can do a session on that at some point, no trouble, so just let me know. So I'm just peeling off all of this stuff here. And you'll see that the colours have actually bled underneath the tape slightly, which takes care of the edge blending actually. So that's a nice win on this type of masking and rust technique, because I've already got the beginning of my tiles rust effects done, and I've got the edges nicely done. If I had used liquid mask for this instead, which I easily could, I would have to paint in the edges again, because the liquid mask does flow up the edges. So that would be a bit of more work compared to this. So there we are. Last bit of masking tape is off there. No, one left. There we are. Let's grab that one, and here we go. Right, I am just going to check something. Just a second. Just wondering here. If I actually have any connection. Go. Ah, excellent. So, picking up the piece here, you can see that around some of the edges here there's been some nice flowing of the rust effects in underneath the tape, which is actually an effect I try to encourage for these, because it makes it even more random and cool looking. So I'm going to start with the washes. First one is Seraphim Sepia. This goes on all of the yellow and black striped tiles, because it really helps darken down the edges here, make them even nicer and darker than they were before. And yeah, there we go. Don't have to be worried about being super precise with this, but I do not want to cover too much of the blue tiles here, so I'm trying to avoid that. And There we go. That's the first bit. After that, I'm going to grab some airbrush. The predecessor of this one was even nicer, but this one is still a very, very nice colour blend. I do use it for almost everything. And this I'm going to throw on here and there on the blue tiles and on the stripe ones. And I'm actually on purpose being a bit messy with this, because this is going to help me when I then grab some tissue paper to simulate wear and tear, passage of time, and just, you know, the general dirtiness of each tile here. There we go, that's looking better already. Yep. Okay, corners are nicely done there. Boom. Here we go. I'm then going to grab a bit of the light rust again, because I want to put that down in the edges and corners of the center bit here in particular, but also some of the areas here with the piping and the detailing on them. So mixing in some of the orange rust, 71-130 yet again, to get some real coverage on it. And I'm actually holding my airbrush fairly close, so I want to encourage this stuff to flow randomly. So I spray some of it on, and then I just, actually this is just air going through the airbrush right now, so I want to make sure that I force it into the corners away from the larger surfaces and just make it behave as randomly as possible. And there we are, that's already looking much better. And doing the same for the piping bits. Yeah, here we are, various detailing. I can get some on the actual panels themselves, but in general I try to avoid it because I'm going to be using so many other colours on them. And here we are. Key is to be sort of random in the application here. Have some areas where we have a lot of coverage, others where we have little to no coverage at all. Right, that's the rust pretty much done. Now just putting some cleaner through the airbrush here again. This is mainly to get rid of the orange colour, because I'm now going to grab a different wash, and this one is called dark yellow. This one works really nicely with the bluish turquoise panels I found. I'm just going to put that in just a tiny few places here. There we go. Yep. Just start modulating that one a bit more, and again I can just randomize it a bit with a bit of tissue paper. Good, so that's that. And as for the contrasts, let's see what's good there. I shall grab some Agaros Dunes. These behave really nicely through an airbrush, because a lot of the time if you're running contrasts and you've got them on your paintbrush, you can get a semi-gloss finish to them, but through the airbrush they generally turn out super matte. There's probably a really good chemical reason for it, but I'm just happy it happens. So I'm going to use that to really darken down some areas of the tiles here. And the cool thing about these is that they are far more opaque than the washes I'm using. So I could actually end up having part of this tile almost entirely covered with the contrast paint and really be able to change the different colours quite a bit. Okay, that's coming along nicely now. I could go ahead and add decals, and if so, I would put them in before these techniques, so have them underneath most of the rust, most of the dirt layers. But in this case, this is all going to sit underneath the staircase, so I don't really see the point of it. I will probably add some decals to the upper part of the staircase just to give it some more interest. Right, that's gonna work nicely. But again, if I am too enthusiastic with any of these techniques, I can just remove most of it with tissue paper, adding again to the randomness, adding to the weathered look effect. And there we are. Actually pretty happy with how this is coming together so far. These being acrylics, the orangey rust parts up here around the center in particular are going to dry duller than they are right now. So what I usually do is I add some pigment that I fix with AK pigment fixer, and that really dries up super bright, so you need to be careful how you apply it and how much you use, but it really helps give those final little touches to the rusted areas. But fairly happy with this as it stands right now. Great. So I'm just gonna move back to the staircase itself. It's dry enough that I can actually start peeling away parts of the masking tape at this point, if I do so carefully. So I'm going to just see if I can't peel away parts of it here. Yep, here we go. And you'll see that again the rust has sort of crept underneath and started these nice patternings that I really like to have on my terrain. So again, just peeling these off here. I'll try and see if I can't put these two components together just temporarily so you guys can see or at least get an idea what the piece is going to look like once it's complete. And here we go. There we go. Now these thin strips on the sides here are quite difficult to put down, but they really help sell the idea that the banding on top here is a separate piece, hasn't been painted the same way as the other. So I try to get them on there, and here we go. I've actually missed a bit there, but I can mask that off later and reapply some rust effects just to that layer, so it's no problem. Now the final corner here actually has a blue tile and then with the striped bit on top, which I just thought would be a nice effect to apply. And corner down in the staircase here, again with the stripes. Just peeling this middle bit off, there we are. Boom. There we go. And a little bit here. Right. That'll do for now. See if I can't place these temporarily roughly like they're going to go. And this is basically the look of the thing once it's completed. You'll see that the rust has really crept in on this lower tile here. I'm actually going to just quickly apply some washes here and there, already just starting up some of these random weathering effects. Again, I'll start with the sepia. It mostly goes on the yellow tiles. There we are. So, yep, great. Grab some of the dark yellow wash, 76503. I think I mentioned that before. Really going to put that into this particular tile here, and then wipe most of it away so it gets a nice weathered look. Add some here and there, and then go back over it with the Airbrush Earth Shade, and a bit of darker edges to it. And once again, I mean, these are very random techniques. A lot of the work is actually done just by the paint flowing randomly into each other. And finally, some of the rust again, and once more adding some 71-130 orange rust to that mix as well. So throwing that on there, here we are. Let's see, okay, yep. And these are all gonna nicely flow together, really helping the randomness of the piece. So if I can, I'll just try and lift this up again without getting my hands all covered with paint. And here we are. Of course, I need to demask the lower levels here, so I'll do that in a while. But this is actually pretty much the extent of how I start off my terrain pieces. And as you can see, I mean, you've been following along here, you can see that this took me all of, what, 40 minutes or so to do. There's a lot of preparation work before I start any of these pieces. It of course gets covered in primer. Usually it'll be black. I may use a brownish tone once in a while. It's not super important because all of it will get covered anyway, and these are nice, nicely covering colours. On top of that, I do the various tiles, the blues, the stripy bits. Sometimes I'll have a red tile just to break it up a bit, or I'll use a different colour for the blue tiles themselves. This one was done with 71319 A28M greyish blue. Vallejo has the most complicated paint names, but they do have hundreds of them, so I guess they need to. I generally just go by the numbers on them, because that makes it so much easier when you're trying to describe them to someone. For most of the tiles, I use the 71132 aged white for my highlights. It is kind of a dark eggshell color, so it brightens up the colors, but it doesn't make them completely faded like if you use pure white for them. Let's see, I think that's pretty much all I had for this stream session. I've covered some masking techniques, some rust techniques, some wash techniques through an airbrush, and we ended up with this rather nice looking staircase here. Should look right at home in the underhive. It does still need to get some added chipping to it, which I'll do with a sponge. A lot of the time I just use spare packing material. This is from one of my Feldherr cases, but really any spongy material will do. I'll pull off corners of this stuff, get a random look to it, add some paint, and really importantly, that should not be airbrush paint because it does flow too well. You actually want semi-dry paint for this stuff. So my go-to is 70822 German Camo Black Brown, which is almost completely black but has kind of a brown edge to it. And I will just use that, sponge it on here and there to again increase the randomness, increase the weathered look of the thing. Finally, I'll usually add a metallic color. I'm partial to the Mecha Color Dark Steel 69065, but I have also used Games Workshop's bolt gun metal or similar in the past. And of course the rust pigments, which I generally use fresh rust and old rust, which yeah, here we go. So these are the rust pigments that I generally use. These are completely dry paint pigments if you haven't used them before. If you put them on here directly, they are going to wear off. They are going to stick to everything else as well. So you need to fix them. That's where the AK pigment fixer comes in. It is one of the few thinner based paints that I do use. So be careful with that one. Make sure you have some cracker window or have some sort of protection for yourself, because this is fairly harsh. There are acrylic pigment fixers which you can use. They take forever to dry. They take absolute hours to dry in some cases, which is beyond my patience. So in general, I stick to the enamel fixer for my work. But I will cover that in a separate stream. Thank you so much for joining in today. I'll try and do another one of these sometimes soon. If you have a technique that you'd like me to cover, if there's like decals, pigments, whatever it is, stenciling work, whatever, let me know in the comments. Drop me a line in a message. In general, if you have suggestions, ideas, comments, criticism, whatever, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon. Cheers.